excited about this. I think that once we do a head count, we find that you might have outbested the men who showed up for Tough Mudder, so yay! As I want to introduce the Board of Directors of the Waterford Historical Society, so you know who we are, and you can seek us out and tell us how much you enjoyed this evening, and might have something to contribute in the future. So the Vice President is over here, is Donna Heath, and she's also our videographer, and she's also does a lot of other things behind the scenes that help make our program successful. The woman who takes your money is Roberta Smith. She's our treasurer. She also is the person that you want to send in your reservation forms to for our rhubarb event on June 15th. We're going to be starting a full court press to get you to commit to coming to this dinner. Come on in! Yes, 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 come on in. Come down in front. Yes, yes, they're related to one of the dressers. So there are reservation forms on that back table there, this hot pink. So please pick one up. We have a P.O. box that we share with the town where you can mail in your reservation form. But we'll need this to keep track if you're going to come to the dinner and the show or just the show. There are those minor logistics and reserve. And bring your friends. And what we learned from last year is that we're going to put tables of 5 and 10 or 4, depending on how you want to group yourselves. So bring your friends. Bring lots of your friends. Bring at least you and 9 other of your friends. Yeah, we have a number of tables for 10. The reason why this year is particularly important is because in January 1860, this building was dedicated. It replaced the previous building that had been burned to the ground in June of 1859. And so the building is 160 years old, and this is a great opportunity to celebrate its longevity, the fact that it has not fallen down. It is a beloved icon here in Lower Waterford, and that leads me to introduce Noreen Abbott Williams, who is, do I have your right, all your names in the right order? Who will also be talking tonight. She's president of the Lower Waterford Congregational Church, and the Historical Society and the church partner every year to put on this benefit event. For the church, it's about the restoration funds. You can see that we need that. And for the Historical Society, it's about our Oral Histories project, which we have now begun to post up. You can either find this on YouTube or you can find us through the Waterford blog spot that Beth maintains for us. We have a 4-part series on Vivian Daniels Davis, or you can listen to all 42 continuous minutes. That's also up. We also have Elizabeth Rudd Knights, who grew up on Simpson Brook Road. She had come to one of our Historical Society meetings in 2016. We have 2 walking tours with David Morrison of the village, and we have 2 when we were meeting over at the Davies Library back in 2015, where we had people who came to the district schools, the one-room schoolhouses. And I'm looking around, and I don't see anybody who attended those here. You did. Oh, here in Waterford?
Not the schools, the gatherings at the
Oh yes, gatherings, yes. I was going to call out the people that had attended the Hookers schools, because there are fewer of them, and so as there become fewer of them here in Waterford, those are oral histories that we do want to capture. Yes, Chuck?
South Kirby.
Okay, great. We could adopt you into Waterford.
1 through 8.
Okay. You did?
Yes.
Oh, gee. So, we'll put you on the list.
And Donna.
And Donna. Yes, well, we have her on we have her name with a long list of things we want to interview her about. I think this is why she stays behind the camera. Okay, so the reason why you all came here is because Nova Forbes of the St. John's Creve Coeur, yes, chapter of the DAR, did a tremendous amount of research for the church to help them organize their records, and also started sort of looking into the future about a possible program that has to do with weddings and fashions. And everyone sort of stepped up their game to participate and brought all kinds of stuff, from beautiful antique dresses with stories to tell, and a whole bunch of other artifacts, and food, including a wedding cake. And there's a sample rhubarb pizza that Roberta Smith didn't think I could make. So I'm going to now turn this over to Nola Forbes and have her share with you what she has discovered and how she's going to invite various individuals here to participate with what she brought. So, Nola Forbes.
Thank you. So I think when I invite folks up, if you'll come sit here, or should I sit there and they should be here? We want to try to record some of the details that we have. So I thought I'd start tonight with one of the early volumes in the church records that was kept by the minister Thomas Hall. And in that first volume, one section had church business, one had baptisms, and starting on page 139 were marriages. These were not the earliest marriages in town, but they are the earliest ones in that volume. I bolded those that were actually from Waterford at the time. So February 28th, 1826, the two residents, Cyrus Hadley and Harriet MacDonald, were married. March 15th, 1826. Don't remember where Ambrose Clark was from, but Amanda Davison was from here. September 14th, 1826, both Ephraim Badger and Harriet Farr. And I remember seeing the Farr name in a lot of early records here. And then the next one, his first name was hard to read, and when I researched online to see, there were probably 5 versions of his name, but the correct one seems to be, and I don't know if I can say it right, Jehiel, Jehial Powers from Lindenville, and he married Waterford's Polly Richardson, and there were early Richardson names, and that was December 27th, 1826, when they were joined in wedlock. March 18th, 1827, both were residents of Waterford, Shubael Farr, another Farr, and Abigail Truman. And then, in 1827, on May 31st, Jefferson Hosmer from Littleton married Lois Pike. And you know that the Pike name is here in many ways. June 14th, 1827, Charles W. Goss from Waterford married Meanda Miles from St. Johnsbury. And now we have an international one. September 26, 1827, Andrew McDuffie from Barnstead, Upper Canada, is how it was listed, married Sally Taylor of Waterford. And this one was out of sequence. The minister had numbered the marriages, and this was on a later page, and he put a note that it had been an omission. So I placed them in numerical order here. January 6th, up in 1828, Ephraim Gregory from Concord married Abigail Young from Waterford. And I only have a few more that I'll read from this. February 7th, 1828, Joseph Farrington of Coventry, Vermont, married Lydia Brown from Waterford. And then the last 4 that I brought tonight are all couples from Waterford. March 13th, 1828, Ira Church married Persis Ruggles. October 18th, 1828, Daniel Brown and Mary B. Farr. January 29th, 1829, Lauren Kinney, and we're going to hear that name, I think, again later, and Emmeline Holbrook. And then February 12th, 1829, Samuel Church and Lucinda Tilton. Did any of you recognize any name, family names, community names from those? So that's as far as I went, knowing that we would have other stories tonight, but I thought it was nice to take a look at some of those. So I think it would be nice to hear some of the stories from the audience. I did have a chance to go through the books of clippings that go for families in Waterford A through Z. And so I have those alphabetically, but it doesn't mean everyone is represented. And I thought after we hear your stories, I'll do some highlights from there. And then we'll hear about the garments that we have in the room. So let's see. I think Mary, would you come up and say something? Yes, because that will tie in with some of the newspaper clippings and I want to remind people. So come and join me.
David's not here?
I don't see him. Has anyone seen David Morrison this evening? Out riding his motorcycle?
That would be a good thing.
So the camera's over here, and the audience would also like to know what special little stories associated with your property.
This is really, I was hoping David would be here because he would be able to tell me when this happened or if he knows more about it. But Dorothy Morrison, who was the most wonderful person in the world, was our town librarian, and I worked in the school library, and she would often come and either on her own read stories with the kids, or sometimes in a history day group talk about history in Waterford. And one thing she mentioned to me, I live on the old Remick farm on Remick Road, and she mentioned that for her wedding, she picked her flowers at the Remick farm, and it was lady slippers. And that I don't know.
If David were here, he would give us the year.
Right, and I have had a chance to look at some of the diaries of when the Remicks lived at the farm, and there was a mention at one point of Dorothy visiting. So I was going to try and find out if that might have been Dorothy Morrison. And another entry had Arthur Morrison's 21st birthday, so I need to talk to David some more about that. And so the showy lady slippers are the ones that they're more in the swampy areas, and until about 2 years ago, the Remick family would come at about the time that they're blooming, and we would see them there. And the past 2 years, we haven't seen any. We were reading about it, and apparently for one thing, the deer eat them, and also in the old days, the cattle would go through there, and they're so sensitive to the biome that probably they got used to the cattle going through, and the manure would help them grow, and probably the cattle kept some of the deer out. So I'm still hoping to see them again, but I love Mrs. Morrison telling me that story about her wedding flowers.
Thank you. I know we have at least one other story out here. We have a volunteer, some story connecting with a Waterford wedding. Noreen, do you want to come up and tell some of yours? And then I'll get one. Sure. Talk from here so we can get.
And I guess recent is actually sort of a misnomer because it was 24 years ago.
More recent than Dorothy Morrison
Exactly.
picking her flowers.
My oldest daughter, Lissa, worked at Rabbit Hill Inn for a while and chose in 1995, September 23rd, to be married in this church. And at that point, this church was in between ministers. So we had to import a minister, and it turned out that my husband, his brother-in-law, or actually would be an uncle to my daughter, was a UCC minister. So we brought him up and discovered on Friday night at the rehearsal that he had to get a special license in order to marry them. So we did all kinds of running around. I think Joanne was involved.
As town clerk.
As town clerk. And we managed to get it certified that he was a real minister, and in fact, that he could marry them. But it was I have a picture book up here, an album of lots of pictures of that day. And I remember she had a large wedding party. She had 7 attendants and he had 7 groomsmen, so they couldn't fit up here easily. So we had to rearrange a little bit. And I remember the Charltons and I can't remember who else was involved in the church at the time. And they were very concerned that we put everything back the way it belonged. So if you look at the pictures, you'll see that things have been rearranged to accommodate this huge wedding party. But it was a wonderful day. I was telling Barbara that it was September, and so I had Sally Lawrence and I came down and decorated all the window boxes over there and over there, because we had all of these people coming to Lower Waterford and it looked pretty dull. So we did that, we decorated. And we rented it was actually a bus that had been used at Yellowstone. And so it was a big yellow, very old bus. And that's how we got the wedding party from here to their reception, which was on the top of the quad at Bretton Woods. So the reception was on the ski area. And so all the guests had to go up in the chairlift and come down in the chairlift. So it was quite interesting. And I have some pictures of guests holding the flowers in their lap on the chairlift to get them from here to where the reception was. So it was fun.
And so you did make one other mention to me that when we think about the little sayings of when you get married, you need to have something old and something new. And what did she have that was borrowed?
She borrowed her wedding dress. Her wedding dress actually belonged to her future sister-in-law. And so she had gotten married maybe 5 years earlier. And so they altered it to fit her. And it was a beautiful gown, just gorgeous. So that was very, very nice.
But we don't have the gown tonight.
No, we don't, because it went back after, and other brides used it. So it was a very interesting. So.
And I had made a note that the decorations included baskets of roses, lilies, carnations. There were candles with alstroemeria.
Yeah.
So her clipping is one of the ones in the archives at the moment.
Yeah. So it was fun, and it poured on Friday for the rehearsal. Absolutely poured. It was freezing cold. Many of these guests were from South Carolina, so they were not impressed with Waterford. And I'm thinking, how are we going to do this in the rain? But Saturday was beautiful. And cold, but beautiful. So it turned out just fine.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Thanks. Yep.
So her photo book is up front, and you can take a look when we break. So another story. Did I see someone that was anxious to share? Glenn, want to come up? Please. Well,
My daughter was married in this church October 3rd, 1998. And I remember when she called me and said, "Mom, I want to get married in Vermont." We lived in Arizona. She was living in Texas. Honey, why? And she said, "I want all my grandparents, my cousins, my aunts and uncles there." Well, my mother, her grandmother, was Geneva Wright in Gilbert, and Marion and Robert Pasho, who had owned the White Village Farm across the road here. And my sister Jean lived in New Hampshire. And anyways, lots of relatives in New England. So we had quite a whirlwind of trying to figure out how we were going to do it. But my sister helped a lot in decorating and just going different places for different things. And we had party, her attendants coming from Arizona and Texas, and her groom was from Texas. And what was so amazing, I went in and I said to Joanne Jeronka, do you know someone that we could rent a house from? Because we need a place to house all these people. And she told us that time, the couple that owned this farm had lived in New Jersey, and she said, I think they're here. You might go ask them. So I didn't know them at all, but I drove in and I said, I really need a place to rent. And this used to be in my husband's family. Would you would you allow us to rent from you? And they did. It was amazing. And that's where my husband and I started dating, and it was like a circle of love in what went on that whole time. But yes, my daughter's name was Christina Jill Pacho, and like I said, I have many cousins who were married here. And when you were talking about Dorothy Morrison, I know her daughter Annie was married here. And her husband was in the military at the time. And other cousins that you will speak of.
And so
Yes, and so when my daughter was married, my cousin Paul Powers, who was pastor at the Baptist Church in St. Johnsbury, was the officiating minister. And there were a lot of special moments because of just the family. And my mother had attended this church as a child, and it was just a neat thing, even though logistically it was a challenge, but it really worked out, and we were happy to.
And we have that clipping in the...
Yeah, and my sister said, don't you have some pictures here of it? I said, no. Since Mother passed away a year ago, we are starting to disperse, things from her house, and I had taken things back for my daughter from when I left in the fall, and so I don't even have any pictures, but anyway.
But we have the story.
Yeah.
And my extra note was she had a nosegay of ivory and dark red roses intertwined with ivy and greens.
Mm-hmm. It
Sounds like it was delightful. Thank you. So maybe to tie in with that one of the other news clippings that I found was her sister, both of your sisters, Esther Lynn Wright, got married September 30th, 1973, and married Douglas Lee Mitchell, and her aunts sang the music. So Patricia Wallace Powers sang "Oh Perfect Love," and then there was a duet with Patricia Wallace Powers and Lina Bullock Powers, and they sang "Each for the Other." And I don't think I know that song, but we originally were hoping we could have some church music, some wedding music here tonight. Debbie Hampson wasn't available. I wasn't sure if anyone in the audience would be ready to impromptu do a tune or not. In the notes, there were various people over the years for weddings. Barbara, would you want to tell us anything about some of the weddings you might have played for?
Oh, a good many. And it was also wonderful. I enjoyed every one. I think about them even to this day.
Is there a special tune that was your favorite or that seemed to be requested a lot?
Oh, I don't know if that was, the traditional wedding matches were usually done. And I can't remember the other special ones that people requested.
I put you on the spot.
But what I like especially is truly the presence of the Lord in this place. And my husband and I were married here May 3rd, 1953.
Ooh. And who was the minister at the time?
Leroy Hastings, I believe. that church until we moved here. The minister from there came up to take part in our wedding.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
Did most of the weddings have the reception downstairs, or did they use the inn, or the little inn?
In the clippings that I have found, the receptions mostly were not here.
Ours was here
But-
because we had a smaller, about 7 people. And,
For yours and Dan's wedding?
no,
for your
for my
daughter's.
daughters, yeah. And there were, I think, Ian's was downstairs.
My husband's and mine's downstairs too.
It was. What did you have for special refreshments?
Oh, the ladies put it all on for us.
Is there someone else with a story that you want to share right now? You could come up and have the hot seat. The sun has gone down enough so it's not in our eyes. And we know there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that goes into getting a wedding organized, or all the different stages. And I heard part of this story the other day, I believe, right? But I'll let you tell.
My youngest son, Darwin, and Don Jones at the time decided to get married secretly in April of 1996, in Burlington, Winooski. I think it was Winooski when they got married. So then my other son happened to get married in between, so they didn't want to interfere with that. They didn't tell us, and they didn't want to upstage anybody. So about 9 months later, after we got married, they said, oh, they slipped a note across the table, and it had a return address of Mr. and Mrs. Darwin Jerenkoff, and it was their Winooski address. And I thought, what's that? Oh, they're married. Oh. They finally didn't tell me because I couldn't figure it out. So anyway, we decided that, well, it'd be nice to have a reception, and they wanted to have a wedding ceremony because it was before the justice of the peace. So they had it here on the anniversary of the day that they got married. So it was April 12th, 1997. Yes.
I'm updating my
Yes.
notes.
Okay, so I brought some pictures. The interesting thing about her wedding and the stressful thing about her wedding was the lady who was making the dress rode in the car on the way over from Burlington finishing. So they were really stressed. But it's a beautiful dress. I have some pictures.
And would you be willing to leave them up along the front pew
Sure.
for people to look at after we break?
It is. And Rick and John Summers performed the renewal of their wedding. He was pastor at Pasumsic at the time, Pasumsic Community Baptist Church, and so he came up and did that. And he's also my husband's cousin. And then the lady who, the lady who made the dress is in the picture. Her name was Kathleen. And she made the shoes. She decorated the shoes. And the purse and the hairpiece and the dress. And she had made the top of the dress, and it formed a V coming down like this in the front. And it was 2 pieces, and it was over a tulle skirt. And so it was quite, Dawn and she had designed it, and it was a lot of little pearls sewn in everywhere. So that's what she was doing that way. More pearls. So anyway, Karen and Rick Menard sang The Anchor Holds, and Rick sang it, and Karen signed it just for the effect of having a beautifully signed song. Unfortunately, the anchor didn't hold. They were divorced. But we have 2 wonderful grandchildren from that union, Shelby and Gabe, and they're Shelby will be 18 in October, no, September, and Gabe will turn 16 in June this year. And since then, Darwin has remarried, and they have a 1-year-old who's going to come and spend a week with us 1st of June. So, I'm going to start. So that's the story.
Oh, good, thank you.
So I'll leave these pictures
Yes.
out so that you can see.
That would be great. Got any other stories that I don't know about out here? So, the Waterford clippings were alphabetical. Oh, actually, before I do those, we had an email exchange with a relative of this early wedding that took place in Waterford. And not all weddings took place in the church. Some were at the bride's home in early days, and in fact, the minister records don't specify where the ceremony took place. But if you submitted an article to the newspaper and it was printed, you might find out where it took place. And from this one, even though it didn't specify the clues that are in it, makes me believe that this was held at the bride's home. So this was from July 14th, 1909. The Carpenter-Kinney wedding in Waterford. A pretty wedding took place here July 6th, when Miss Beatrice Elizabeth Kinney, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Nathan Kinney, became the bride of Irving Francis Carpenter, the son of Allen Carpenter of Somerville, Mass., a graduate from Harvard College this spring. The ceremony was performed by the Reverend Frederick G. Chutter of Littleton in the presence of the relatives and intimate friends, the wedding being a daisy wedding with lavish decorations throughout the rooms of daisies, ferns, and cut hothouse flowers. Miss Bessie Kinney of Littleton, a cousin of the bride, played the wedding march from Lohengrin. Did anyone of you know how that one goes? Maybe if you've heard it. Is that Lohengrin? Okay. So we have heard that. The couple were unattended, but were followed by a small ring bearer, Miss Catherine Gray Beatty, or Beatty, of Littleton, the double ring service being used. The bride, who is a dainty blonde, wore an exquisite wedding gown of white crepe de chine, cut directoire princesse, and wore a long wedding veil. She carried bride's roses. Her traveling gown was blue with hat to match. A reception followed and a collation. Who knows what a collation is? I had to look it up. A collation was served, so it's a light meal. Probably more than we'll have tonight. A collation was served. The newly married couple then departing in an automobile for St. Johnsbury, where they took the train for a trip to various points, though not making known their destination. They will return to Waterford and spend the summer, taking up their residence in the fall in Somerville, Mass. The bride was graduated from the Littleton High School in the class of 1908. The groom is the son of a prominent Somerville man who came originally from Vermont and is well known in this region, but they didn't name him. Mr. Carpenter will follow the profession of the law. The array of wedding gifts was a notable one: china, linen, silver, and cut glass fairly loading the tables. The bride's gift to her small ring bearer was a handsome ring set with pearls. So that was a 1909 wedding that might help set the stage when we talk about the items behind me. So a few of the other clippings included some that were garden weddings. And so I was curious whether Dorothy and Arthur had a garden wedding themselves, and maybe David can share. But when I started going through clippings, I found one item that prompted me to research the spelling of the name. So in 1823, Betsy Kidder of Waterford married Philip Vermouth of Barnet, and the minister of the gospel at that time was Reuben Mason. So I think I've seen Reuben Mason in some of the early church maybe the published little history of the church is where I'd first seen that. So alphabetically, so we've heard a little bit about a few of these, but there will be a couple of, I think, interesting notes, and then we'll move into what the garments are, and then we'll be ready for our refreshments. So we have Karen Ann Ash, married Christopher S. Kate in 1987. Reverend Pastor Joseph Rinaldi officiated, and his brother Timothy Kate played the guitar of music and lyrics written by the groom. Suzanne Marie Bailey of Waterford married Gregory Alton Broom in 1992. It was performed by Reverend Terry Fitzgerald, and Jane Sager played the music. How many of you know Jane from Barnet? She graduated with my younger brother.
Barbara also knows Susie Broom. Didn't she work in your mother's restaurant? Didn't Susie Broom work in your mother's restaurant?
I don't know, sister.
All right, I stand corrected. I can't keep them all straight.
Well, some of these might spark some other memory, and so I'm hoping that may occur. And then Lori Ann Bailey, who might have been a sister to that one, married in 1978, although there's quite a span there. She married Reginald George Emmons. Reverend Scudder Parker performed theirs, and the organist was Mrs. Barbara Dowse on that. And the next couple, I don't know which one was a Waterford resident. Barbie Berry and William Barrett Jr. were married in 1992 by Reverend John Merriam, but they're in the B folder that is unsorted yet, and I didn't recognize either of those.
I think, or in fact, I know the Barretts own the white farm.
The White Farm,
White Village Farm.
Yeah, White Village.
because Barrett is a common name and to know the right connection. So that was in 1992. And then I wasn't sure if Christine May Bonnet would be here tonight. She has come to some of our Historical Society meetings. She was married in 1974 in this church. So these are all weddings in this church, unless I state otherwise. She married William Thomas Wright Jr. and Reverend C.H. Blake performed their service. And then is Marie Irene Bonnet her sister? She married Dale Richard LaRock in 1985. Again, Reverend Scudder Parker, and Mrs. Dowse was the organist. And then there was a little clipping, and I don't know what year it was, but I know it occurred year after year. Chef John Carroll, who was the chef at Rabbit Hill for a good spell, and his son Chuck has become also a gold medalist as a chef. But John Carroll's St. Johnsbury Academy culinary class had their picture in the paper preparing wedding cakes. And the culinary classes still have, the second year students still do displays of wedding cakes at the end of this semester. So it should be imminent in the next few days. And they'll put pictures online, but they really are creative. But that was nice to see one of the early ones. But if you clip things from the newspaper, please put a date on the back or the edge. There was nothing, things on the back weren't enough clues to say when it was. Do any of you know the Clickinger family? Alyssa or Elisa? Alyssa Linnell Clickinger married Barry Robert Stock in 1991. Reverend Terry Fitzgerald and a string trio played the Pachelbel canon here. All right, Christine J. Cushing of Waterford married Brian Tillotson in 1991. Reverend Terry Fitzgerald. This time the organist was Linda Cluot. Many of you know Linda. She lives in North Danville and is now a retired teacher. Then we have in 1988 Marilyn J. Dowse married John S. Anthony. Reverend Scudder Parker officiated, and there was music by a string quartet, it says. So is that your daughter? Yes. Any special memory from that wedding
Oh, my goodness.
to share?
Just everything was so beautiful.
And that was in September 3rd
Yes,
that year.
yes.
So Labor Day weekend sort of time.
What was that?
Around Labor Day weekend,
Yes.
so they get a special celebration every year, 3-day weekends.
The youngest daughter is now at St. Michael's, so it's been a long time.
Yes, yes. And then Alan Earl Douse,
My son.
okay, he married Deborah Ann Varney in 1987, so a year before, almost a whole year between them, and Reverend Scudder Parker officiated. Anything special about that one? There wasn't much in that clipping.
No, that didn't last, but he's now very happily married.
So that can happen. No guarantees. The intention is good. 1986, Joanne Lee Gray married Christopher Wright, and it was Reverend Scudder Parker. And we've talked about Darwin Drunka, and we've talked about Christina Peychaud. So now up to Stephen Rodney Rutledge and Crystal Lee Dennison in 1986 were married by Reverend Scudder Parker at Rutledge's Waterford residence. And I understand it's over near the radio station, that end of town. They had a white rose arbor, so this was a garden wedding. A white rose arbor with green ivy, daisies, and 2 white doves on the arbor with base bouquets of green ferns and wildflowers. And the bride's bouquet was white daisies and pink mini carnations. So, and that was at the end of June. So another daisy wedding to think about. Bonnie Lee Willie and David P. Gukwa had a garden wedding in 1978 at the wedding and the reception were at her parents' Waterford home, and Reverend Scudder Parker performed that one. We heard about Lissa, so we're getting closer here, and we heard about Esther Wright. So then, here, this is actually a good one to be at the end. It was alphabetical this way as well, but Rolla Wright Jr. and Audrey Powers, who know them? So we've got, who's related to them?
And Esther Lynn was their daughter,
Yes, yes.
and she's a cousin to us, and Audrey was our aunt, my mother's sister.
Oh, yes. So, because it took me a long time to realize your mother was a Powers. So in 1947, on October 4th, Rolla and Audrey were married on her 18th birthday in this church in a candlelight ceremony. Then, in 1997, for the whole weekend, there was a celebration of their 50th anniversary and her birthday as separate staged events. And from the write-up, her children each had a different part that they were responsible for. And so two of the children, spouses, I don't have the last name, but her children that I could gather from there were Catherine, who married Carl Bennett, Lyle, who married Cheryl somebody, Esther Lynn, who in the write-up was called Lynn, but then when I had her wedding one, and it was there as married to Doug
She did
Mitchell,
not like the word, name Esther, she just chose to go.
so I should cross off Esther.
Well, that's her
Well, in the
middle.
writing,
Now, that's her middle, Esther is her first, Lynn is her middle.
in the clipping, it called her Lynn, but Mitchell, so she's married to Doug Mitchell. Leonard had a part, and Amy, who married Scott somebody.
Brill.
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 Spell it.
B-R-I-L-L.
Okay. Now I've lost my pencil. Okay, so I think we're ready now to hear something about our garments and the quote behind me, unless there's another story that got prompted.
Did you have Patricia Wallace and Russell Powers? They were married.
So I went through the clippings. I had to go through all I didn't have to, but I did. The A through Z folder binders that as people donate things to the Historical Society, they try to put them in alphabetically. And so there might have been some clippings that snuck by me, or the clippings might not have been in there. And so this is not a complete list by any means, but I'll leave that out here if you wanted to review again something that you heard me say. But the archives is ongoing. The donations items that you have can be added. Some families seem to have a lot of things in there, and others we don't know who they are, and there's still some things that have to be sorted, I discovered. There's some folders in the front of each with things that are still could be further sorted as time permits. So I know that there are apt to be some more stories. And that's part of tonight, I think, is to help encourage you to look for items. All right, so now let me just move these out of my lap so that I'm not going to try to tell you the same thing that you've already heard. So we've heard a little bit from the story about hand sewing and finishing up garments at the last minute. And in my family, I didn't grow up in Waterford, but sewing was a big part of our family. And I became a quilt maker because one grandmother lived with us and was always making piece quilts, and the other grandmother, I was born on her birthday, and so some of the time that I would visit her, I would get interested in what she was making for quilts. She gave me the quilt top behind me that her aunt had made in the 40s, but she had made the top and didn't finish it. And Grandma never learned to hand quilt, that grandma's. So she asked if I would like to have it and finish it. So for about 10 years at demonstrations, so the Concord Historical Society, there's a picture of me that was in the paper working on the quilting, but I put it away and get it out at demonstrations. But it's a pattern people recognize, the double wedding ring pattern. But it is not an easy pattern, but it's very distinctive, and I thought tonight it would be nice to bring. The earliest gown that we have over here, and I can hold it up, but then I'll put it back down because you can't really see the back of it the way it is here and in the photo. So we have a black and white photo, but I also printed a larger colored copy of, originally, it was worn by Sarah Ella Gilbert for her wedding to Frank Russell Powers, December 24th, 1873 in Concord, Vermont, which is close to Waterford. And her granddaughter, Geneva Ella Powers Wright, on her 93rd birthday, is modeling the dress. So that was in 2012. So it was modeled in Waterford. And Geneva lived in Waterford. So that's the Waterford connection. And wedding gowns were not always white. This was her wedding gown. And you'll see on the back it has a little bustle and a nice little extra thing so that when you walked with it, I'm sure it was impressive. But in the earlier periods, what was made for your wedding dress became your best dress that you wore to other weddings or maybe every week at church. So it wasn't meant to just be worn once. And I didn't inspect this closely earlier, but I'm pretty sure from the age of this would have all been handmade and tailored to fit. So
What year, Nola?
1873.
Actually, I don't think I'm telling you, I think you have to do machines.
Well,
Thoroughly, but
let me lay it back down and
look like a machine.
I do see a layer, yes, I do see a layer of machine stitching. So there is handwork here as well as machine work. Yep, thank you. I haven't looked closely while purchased dress ever, was her wedding dress. And she got married August 21st in 1915 at Woodstock. And so Jane Mariah Hathorn married Fremont Owen Brown, my grandparents. And then when David and I talked about getting married and decided that we would just get married the next week, invite people word of mouth. And so we let the family know, and Grandma said the next day, she said, well, would you consider wearing my dress? And meanwhile, Mom had said to me, would you consider getting married in a church? Because my parents had eloped. So we had arrangements. I went to the Pasumsic, the Baptist Church youth group in Pasumsic, and Reverend Castillo really performed the service. So I had this dress on in the car, in a blizzard, January 15th, 1972, to get married to David. And so in the car, driving on Route 2 from St. J to Pasumsic, you go through a little corner of Waterford. So I had this dress on in 1972 in Waterford briefly, going and coming. So I have a picture here of my grandparents when they married and the wedding certificate copy on the back. I have a photo of David and I after it was official. Oh, and Grandma also gave me her wedding band, and I had to have it resized, but in a week's time we fit it in. And then a little close-up, but the gown, right now it's pretty fragile, so I'm not going to hold it up, but the top is very see-through, and I don't know exactly what Grandma wore under hers. So in that week time, I needed to make myself a shift to wear underneath it. So I have a satin shift, and I ironed it last night, but it's more for just the display here. And I can tell you that if you're storing textiles, even if you're careful, some of the aging is going to show. And even though I store it in acid-free tissue, and I know the Concord Historical Society is careful with the other dress, that there are some things that are irreversible. And so I didn't try ironing this dress this time, but there were also matching gloves. And it is satin, both the gloves, the dress, and the shift that I made to wear underneath that. So those are our oldest pieces, and so they had their little connections. So let's see, next in age, could Beth come up and say a little bit about, so I've jotted down some notes, but it's her story. Is it?
My mother was a Palmer from New England. Her father, at the time she decided to get married, was operating a duck farm outside of Exeter. And he was a man with itchy feet. He changed locations every year, and he changed careers every few years. So there was never much money in the family. And to her embarrassment, my mother didn't have enough to buy a proper wedding dress. But she bought a bridesmaid's dress. And that's the dress that's here. And she was married in the garden on the farm. And in the pictures from the time, you can see the rest of the farm behind her. And then they took one picture inside the house with a picture of my 5 great-grandmother in the background. When I decided to get married, I was still in college. And it was 1971. I was not a hippie, but it was that time of the country's history. And little bits of it sort of caught up with me. So I decided that we would get married right after final exams. And it turned out that my husband, Donald, was also related to the Palmers. His mother's mother was a Palmer. And my mother, being a genealogist at the time, dug right into it and decided that we were 10th cousins.
Which is okay.
It is, but it also tied both of us right back to New England, because that's where our Palmers were from. Donald's grandmother, Palmer, made the wedding cake in a town near Niagara Falls and drove to the college, which was in Michigan, with the cake on a plank in the car. My mother made wedding invitations. Nobody would come from where she was living in New Jersey, white folks were living in New Jersey, but she made announcements anyway to send out. And she asked me what we wanted on them, and I said, well, of course it has to be that quotation from Khalil Gibran about how you get married but you leave spaces in your togetherness. So that's why I say a flower child can be wedding. Yes. We had a problem in that we were not particularly religious, either one of us, but we certainly needed to get properly married. Fortunately, I was studying chemistry, which actually became what I graduated in. And one of the people working in the lab had become a minister by mail order. This was the time of the Vietnam War, and becoming a minister let him stay on doing his graduate work. So he announced that he would marry us. And on the day the final exams ended, my mother and I stood in our bare feet and shorts in the girls' room, slicing up strawberries into paper cups of champagne, so that we could have what my mother considered a proper wedding. I had neglected to keep out a pair of shoes from the things I had packed. All I had was a pair of flip-flops, which my mother didn't think were appropriate with her wedding dress. So I said, well, in that case, I'll go barefoot. We're getting married in the university gardens anyway. And I walked barefoot across the campus wearing my mother's dress. We drank our champagne with strawberries, and we were married by the other person from the lab in the name of the universe. I don't think it was his fault that the marriage didn't hold, but I think I was destined to find Dave eventually.
Yes. Very good.
Thank you.
I don't have a story.
Well, tell us about the dress and the date and the couple.
Okay, we were married June 11, 1966. So we're coming up on 53 years. Yay. We're married in Winchester, Massachusetts.
How many buttons are on the back?
Way too many.
Whoop.
And it is sort of fun to look at the size of the dress. Yeah, well, it was the good old days.
All right, and the last dress that we have here, I think I heard someone, I thought the story was going to turn into that the bottom of the dress was removable, but I guess that didn't happen. So this is one that my daughter grew up in my house learning to sew. She made her prom dress, and she had a dream of making her own wedding dress, and she designed it. And after ironing all the rest of it last night, I decided it was too much to bring. But what she did, but I brought pictures, what she did was design the whole bottom portion to be hooked underneath here with little hooks and eyes. So after the church ceremony for the reception, she could easily remove the long train and the part that you would see on the front that had a matching applique to this one. But part of that sewing to the last minute, Wednesday, when she was getting married on Saturday, she phoned and said, can you tell me how I'm supposed to put the appliques on? And I was trying to describe, and then she said, well, how do I do the lace on the train? I said, I'm coming down. She wanted to do it all herself, but she doesn't do zippers, so she had made the bridesmaids' dresses, and I had already done the zipper for this one. But her Waterford connection is that one of her bridesmaids, so the bridesmaids' dresses, this is all I've got to show you, of the fabric that they were made from, but Barbara Bimson of Waterford was one of her bridesmaids, chance you've got your bridesmaid's dress? She had no clue where it could be, so, but that was, Catherine got married in Mount Holly, Vermont, and, but, you know, the idea is that my grandmother's first store-bought dress was her wedding dress, but my daughter's aspiration was to make her own and design it and do most of it, but there was some machine stitching in it. So I think, unless we've prompted any other stories out here, I think it's time to break and get into that wedding cake.
Who made the cake?
Roberta.
Yay.
Yes. So take a look at things before your fingers are sticky. Or stay back a little while you munch and look closer.